Welcome to my channel. I'm Nancy Thompson, your storyteller of American folklore, thrilling mysteries, and more. Join me for today's tale, The Full Moon and the Thick Fog. Picture this, a chilly wind howling through the night, a lone gravestone standing in an empty field under a glowing full moon, shrouded in heavy mist. Suddenly, a heart-wrenching sob echoes across the dark sky. Why'd you leave me so soon? How am I supposed to go on alone? Take a closer look. A small figure kneels before the grave, one hand burning paper offerings, the other murmuring to the headstone. After a few cries, the figure's voice softens. In a few days, I'm getting married again. Don't worry, I'll take good care of your dad. I promise he won't suffer a bit. Who is this person? Who's in the grave? The sobbing figure is Sarah Jane Landon, a woman life hasn't been kind to. She lost her mom at 3, her dad at 7. Her grandma raised her through tough times until she passed when Sarah was 13. 3 years later, at 16, Sarah married into the Walton family from the next town over. But just 3 months in, her husband died of pneumonia. A year later, the Waltons set her up with another local guy, Tom Carver, a herbalist who made a living gathering plants from the hills. Tom's dad, Old Man Chuck, had been a plant picker too. 10 years back, he'd fallen off a ridge in a freak accident, leaving him bedridden and unable to care for himself. After Tom's accident, the already struggling Carver family hit rock bottom. Tom was a hard worker, sure, but folks around town wouldn't let their daughters near him, said Old Man Chuck was a burden dragging him down. So Tom hit 30 still single, a confirmed bachelor in the eyes of the county. Word got around though, and Sarah Jane Landon didn't mind Tom's situation. After packing her bags, she moved into the Carver house. Once hitched to Tom, the young couple hit it off. Life was tough, money tight, days long, but they made it work, finding a quiet happiness. Then, not even 3 months later, tragedy struck again. Tom slipped off a cliff while foraging and didn't make it. Sarah was a widow once more. Twice married, twice widowed, Sarah Jane Landon's name started carrying a curse around town. They called her a black widow, the kind of woman who brought death to any man she tied the knot with. By the time she was barely 20, no guy in the county dared look her way for a wife. She was stuck, a young widow with a reputation she never asked for. After Tom's death, the Carver house was down to just Sarah and Old Man Chuck, still bedridden and helpless. What now? Some folks told her to pack up and leave, head to a new town, find a fresh start, maybe a new husband who didn't know her story. Sarah thought about it, wavered even. But every time the idea crept in, she'd catch herself glancing at Chuck, frail and gray on his creaky bed. He was over 60, a loner his whole life, or so the rumors went. Word was, he'd found Tom half-starved on a back road years ago and took him in, raised him like his own. Chuck had scraped by, hoping to leave something for Tom one day. Never figured he'd outlive him, or that he'd be the one left broken, mourning a son lost too soon. Life's cruelties seemed to pile up on that old man like storm clouds over the plains. Could she just walk away? After wrestling with it, Sarah made a choice that turned heads. Instead of hitting the road, she stayed put in the Carver house. She took it on herself to care for Chuck, honoring Tom's memory by looking after his dad. Folks didn't get it. Why would a young widow stick around for a crippled old man she wasn't even kin to? Rumors flee fast. Some reckoned Sarah was after money, that the Carvers had some hidden stash, an old family heirloom or a wad of cash tucked away. Stick around, they said, and when Chuck kicked the bucket, she'd cash in. Others spun wilder tales, too crude to repeat. But the truth? Sarah stayed for one reason, plain human decency. Chuck had taken Tom in out of kindness, spent his life making sure the boy didn't suffer. Tom, in turn, had tended to Chuck without complaint, even when the old man's body gave out. No blood tied them, but kindness did. If they could live that way, why couldn't she? Life in the Carver house turned bitter after Tom's passing, hardship on top of hardship. But Sarah, small as she was, held it together. She kept that rickety home from falling apart, day by grueling day. There's an old saying around these parts, trouble follows a widow's doorstep. Sarah wasn't spared. Sure, she carried the Black Widow label, and most folks turned their noses up at her. But for the lonely bachelors who couldn't snag a bride, Sarah Jane Landon was suddenly a prize worth chasing. Enter Jimmy Three Dog Hicks, a local no-good from the same hollow as the Carvers. Over 30, born dirt poor, Jimmy spent cash like it burned his pockets, gambling it away or blowing it on rotgut whiskey. Came from farmers, but wouldn't touch a plow. He lived off odd jobs, petty scams, whatever kept him afloat. He and Tom had grown up together, and though the Carvers never had much, they'd tossed Jimmy a lifeline more than once: food, a hand up when he was down. After Tom died, Jimmy started showing up at the Carver place more often. You'd think he was there to repay the favor, help out in tough times. But Jimmy had other plans, and they all circled back to Sarah. Jimmy Three Dog Hicks wasn't subtle about what he wanted. Sarah saw right through his little game. Those shifty eyes and crooked grins weren't fooling anybody. At first, she tried to play nice, figuring he was just a pest she could shoo off with a kind word or two. "Jimmy, you're better than this," she'd say, hoping he'd take the hint. But Jimmy played dumb, acting like her warnings were just chatter in the wind. He kept coming around, lingering too long, getting too close. Then he crossed a line, started getting handsy. That's when Sarah's patience snapped. She hauled off and slapped him hard enough to rattle his teeth, a crack echoing through the hollow. After that, Jimmy backed off some, kept his distance for a spell. But he didn't quit. He was a dog with a bone, and Sarah was the prize he wouldn't let go. Word around town started spinning out of control. Tales about the Carvers' supposed treasure got wilder by the day. Folks whispered about gold coins buried under the floorboards or a diamond ring old man Chuck's mama left behind. When Jimmy caught wind of it, his greedy little brain lit up. One night, after the sun dipped below the hills, he crept up to the Carver place, quiet as a shadow. His plan? Wait till Sarah and Chuck were asleep, then ransack the house for whatever he could find. He'd barely stepped onto the porch when a splash of water broke the silence. Jimmy froze, ears perked. Was that Sarah washing up? His mind raced, and a sleazy grin spread across his face. He tiptoed to the window, peeked through a crack in the shutters. Sure enough, someone was bathing, but it wasn't what he expected. Sarah wasn't primping herself. She was hunched over a tin basin, wiping down old man Chuck with a damp rag. The old guy couldn't move much, stuck in bed year-round. Every couple of days, his skin started to sour, so Sarah cleaned him up to keep him comfortable. Jimmy's jaw dropped. This wasn't some gold-digging widow scheming for a payout. This was a daughter tending to her kin, blood or not. He was still gawking when something else caught him off guard. It was dead winter, snow piling up outside, and the Carvers didn't have much firewood to spare. After scrubbing Chuck down, Sarah laid out a blanket, shifted him over, and tried to get a fire going. But the logs were damp from the storm, spitting more smoke than heat. Chuck started shivering, his teeth chattering loud enough to hear through the glass. Sarah didn't hesitate. She climbed into bed beside him, pulling the quilt tight to warm him with her own body heat. That's when Jimmy lost it. He kicked the door open with a bang, pointing a grubby finger at her. "Well, ain't this a sight? You shameless hussy, pretending to be all high and mighty, and here you are, crawling into bed with him. What kind of filth you pulling under this roof?" Sarah jumped, startled by the sudden intrusion. For a second, she just stared, wide-eyed. Then she steadied herself, ignoring Jimmy long enough to settle Chuck back under the covers, still trembling from the cold. Only after she'd tucked him in did she turn to face the intruder. "Jimmy Hicks, you're lower than a snake's belly. Sneaking into my house in the dead of night, what's your excuse this time?" Before she finished, Sarah grabbed a broomstick propped by the wall and swung it hard. Jimmy yelped, dodging just in time, then bolted out the door, hollering as he ran. "Come quick, folks. You gotta see this. Sarah Landon's gone and lost her shame." It didn't take long for a crowd to gather outside the Carver place. Nosy neighbors, drawn by Jimmy's racket, huddled in the snow, whispering and pointing. Jimmy, puffed up like a rooster, kept spinning his yarn, how Sarah was warming the old man's bed for all the wrong reasons. The townsfolk ate it up, their murmurs growing louder under the flickering lantern light. Sarah didn't bother explaining. She just slipped back inside, head held high, and shut the door on the whole mess. By morning, Jimmy's tall tale had spread like wildfire through the hollow. Sarah Jane Landon, the Black Widow, was now the talk of the town, folks saying she'd gone from cursed to downright disgraceful. The whispers followed her everywhere, at the general store, along the dirt roads, even in the church pews on Sunday. She felt the stares, the judgment boring into her back. Bit by bit, she stopped going out, too ashamed to face the gossip hounds. The more she hid, the worse it got. Looks pure as snow on the outside, they'd sneer, but sneaking under the covers with that old man behind closed doors.
Sarah couldn't take it anymore.
She broke down one night, sobbing into her hands, the weight of it all crushing her spirit. Half a month later, old man Chuck spiked a fever, burning up, sweat soaking the sheets. Sarah snapped out of her funk and raced to town for help. She banged on Doc Miller's door, begging him to come check on Chuck. But the doc, spooked by the rumors tying him to Sarah's bad luck, wouldn't budge. "Ain't getting mixed up with you," he muttered, shoving a few aspirin into her hand based on her shaky description.
"Tats ali kendo. Take it and go."
Sarah clutched the pills and hightailed it back home. She was halfway down the snowy path when a voice slithered up behind her. Well, well, what's the widow rushing off to now?" She spun around, and there he was, Jimmy Three Dog Hicks, all beady eyes and a smirk that could curdle milk. A couple of his lowlife pals trailed behind, snickering under their breath. Sarah's heart sank, but with Chuck counting on her, she didn't have time for this. She turned to keep walking, ignoring him. Jimmy wasn't having it. He jogged up, blocking her path.
"What's a hurry?"
Off to cozy up to some other fella. He leaned in close, reeking of cheap whiskey. "Ungrateful little thing. The Carvers took me in when I was down, and this is how you repay 'em? Shoulda left you to rot years ago."
Sarah's blood boiled.
She swatted his grubby hand away and landed another slap across his face, harder this time, the sound cutting through the crisp air.
"What do you want, Jimmy? Sheshbat."
He just laughed, loud and ugly.
"What do you want?"
"Ain't it obvious, darlin'? You know exactly what I'm after." His pals hooted, egging him on. Sarah's grip tightened on the aspirin bottle. "Keep this up, and I'll haul you to the sheriff myself," she warned, voice steady despite the fear creeping in. But Jimmy didn't flinch. Her threat was a feather against his thick skull. He lunged, grabbing for her arm. Sarah yanked back, snatched a rock from the snow, and swung it with all she had. It cracked against Jimmy's forehead, sending him staggering. Blood trickled down his face as he clutched his head, howling like a kicked dog. She didn't stick around to watch, dropped the rock and bolted, legs pumping through the drifts. But Jimmy wasn't done. Fueled by rage and humiliation, he stumbled after her, eyes wild, blood streaking his brow. He looked like something dredged up from a nightmare, a man possessed. Sarah ran till her lungs burned, but he was gaining. Just as he lunged, tackling her into the snow, a sharp yell pierced the air. Jimmy froze, then crumpled with a scream, clutching his shoulder. Sarah scrambled up, gasping, and saw it, a butcher's knife buried in his back. Standing over him was a hulking figure, glaring down at Jimmy like he was roadkill.
"Scum like you, picking on a woman. You don't deserve to Briate," the man growled.
He yanked the blade free, and Jimmy whimpered, crawling off into the dark. "You okay?" the stranger asked, not even glancing at Sarah, his voice cold as the wind. "I'm fine. Thank you," she whispered, still catching her breath. "Good. Get home quick," he said, turning away. Sarah nodded, mumbled another thanks, and hurried off, the aspirin still clenched in her fist.
"Zet stranger hot savet, Sarah?"
His name was Hank Hogtanner, the local pig butcher. Folks called him Hog for the way he handled a cleaver, quick, clean, and no nonsense. He'd lost his folks young, left to fend for himself with nothing but a cold stove and a knack for carving meat. Every farmer from here to the next county swore by him come slaughter season. Hank dreamed of a family, socked away every dime he earned to build something worth having. But butchering didn't pay big, and years of blood and bone left him with a smell no woman could stomach. Nearing 30, he was still a bachelor, his prospects as thin as the frost on his windowpane. After that run-in with Jimmy, Hank couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned, Sarah's face stuck in his head, those tired eyes, that stubborn grit. Come sunrise, he started asking around town about her. Didn't take long. Sarah Jane Landon was a name everybody knew, for better or worse. Once he pieced her story together, widowed twice, stuck with old man Chuck, hounded by creeps like Jimmy, Hank felt a pang of something. Sympathy, maybe, or respect. He chewed it over, then tracked down Mabel Johnson, the town's busybody matchmaker, and sent her to the Carver place with a proposal. A few days later, Mabel came back with a grin and good news. Sarah said yes. But there was a catch. She wouldn't leave Chuck behind. Hank didn't blink. "Fine by me," he told Mabel. the old man's part of the deal. He was itching to make Sarah his wife, picturing a life where the Carver shack finally felt like a home. But troubles got a way of sniffing out happy endings. That afternoon, Squire Thompson, a big-shot farmer from the next town over, called Hank in to butcher a hog. Squire done him favors before, so Hank wouldn't take a cent, just hauled the pig's awful home as thanks. With the bloody bundle slung over his shoulder, he headed to Sarah's place to share the haul. By the time he got there, dusk had settled over the hollow, the sky bruising purple. He stepped into the yard, and a man's voice drifted out from inside the shack. Hank stopped cold. Old man Chuck couldn't talk, hadn't in years, not since the fall. So who the hell was in there with Sarah? His blood ran hot, jealousy flaring up. Had she been playing him? He clenched his fists, then forced himself calm. No sense jumping the gun, he'd see for himself first. Creeping to the window, he peered through the grimy glass. What he saw lit a fire in his gut. Some guy was crawling out from under Sarah's bed, days before their wedding, and here she was, stepping out on him. Hank's temper roared, but he held it in check, stomping back home in a fury. By morning, he was still steaming. He marched to Mabel and told her the engagement was off. Mabel pressed him, why the change of heart? But Hank's lips stayed sealed tighter than a mason jar. Mabel, stumped, went straight to Sarah. When Sarah heard Hank was backing out, her jaw dropped. She wasn't letting this go without a fight. She cornered Hank outside his butcher shed, hands on her hips.
What's gotten into you, Hank Tanner?
You can ditch me if you want, but I deserve to know why. Hank snorted, crossing his arms.
Why? You tell him, Sarah.
You got a fella hiding under your bed last night. Who was he? To his shock, Sarah didn't blush or stammer. She laughed, a sharp, clear sound that cut through the chill. Folks say you're honest to a fault, Hank, and I reckon they're right. That fella? That was Pete Grayson, the carpenter.
Chuck's bed frame busted last night. Snapped clean in two. I sleep on a pallet anyway, but Chuck can't.
Pete's a good egg, dropped everything to fix it when I asked. You must have seen him finishing up. Hank's face went slack, the pieces clicking into place. He'd stormed off over a damn misunderstanding. Sarah watched him, her eyes softening. You're a fool, Hank Tanner, but I'll forgive it, this time. 10 days later, it was wedding time. Hank Tanner and Sarah Jane Landon tied the knot in a quiet little ceremony, just a handful of folks from a hollow there to witness. That night, after a long day, Hank hit the hay early, worn out from the fuss. He'd barely drifted off when a dream yanked him awake. A man, middle-aged and stern, stood over him.
Who are you? What do you want?
Hank grumbled, squinting in the haze of sleep. The man smirked.
Who I am don't matter. Just listen up and to what I say. On your wedding night, you're gonna hide under the bed.
Hank bolted upright, ready to swing at the stranger, but the dream shattered. He was alone, sweat beading on his brow. Who was that guy? Why the hell would he say something so strange? Hank lay back down, staring at the ceiling, sleep gone for good. The next day, after the I-do's, Hank invited a few buddies over to celebrate, raise a glass to the new Mrs. Tanner. He could hold his liquor like a champ, but that night, a few shots of bourbon hit him like a freight train. Before he knew it, he was slurring and swaying. His pals chuckled, hauling him to the bedroom where Sarah waited, perched on the quilt in her nightgown. The crowd cleared out, leaving the shack silent except for the wind rattling the shutters. You picked a fine day to get plastered, Hank Tanner, Sarah teased, half smiling as she wrestled his boots off. But then Hank's eyes snapped open, sharp and wild. Without a word, he rolled off the bed and slid underneath it, quick as a fox. Sarah blinked, baffled. Hank, what in tarnation are you doing? Don't ask, he hissed from the floor. I don't even know myself. Just wait. Blow out the lamp. Sarah's mouth hung open, but something in his voice, half crazed, half scared, made her listen. She snuffed the light, plunging the room into shadow, and sat stiff on the bed, ears straining. Half an hour ticked by, slow as molasses. Then, footsteps, soft but steady, crunching across the yard. The bedroom door creaked open, and a wiry figure slipped in, his ratty coat catching the moonlight. Sarah's heart jumped. Who's there? She stammered. The man chuckled, low and nasty. You ain't heard, widow lady? It's me, Jimmy Hicks. Saw your groom passed out drunker'n a skunk. Figured you might be lonesome tonight. He stepped closer, reaching for her with those grimy paws. Sarah recoiled, but before she could scream, another shape loomed up beside her, a man, silent as death. She gasped, recognizing him in a flash. Tom? How? Jimmy spun around, saw the figure, and froze. His bravado melted into a puddle. He wet himself right there on the floorboards. You a man or a ghost? He whimpered. Tom Carver's cold laugh filled the room. Jimmy Hicks, you're a sorry excuse for a friend, ungrateful and shameless. Knowing you, I can't rest easy in my grave. He stepped forward, and Jimmy flinched as Tom's hand cracked across his face. Once, twice, 3 times. Jimmy crumpled, out cold before he hit the ground. Sarah stared, tears welling up. Tom, what's happening? Tom turned, his face softening. Sarah Jane, you've landed a good one this time. Hank looks rough, but he's got a heart of gold, a rare breed. Treat him right. As for this snake, he nudged Jimmy's limp form with his boot. He's been itching for payback since Hank stuck him with that knife. Slipped something in Hank's drink tonight. Planned to sneak in while he was out. Thought he'd have his way with you. Sarah's breath hitched. Tom paused, then went on. I've got to go now. This trash is coming with me. He won't bother you again. Be happy, Sarah. With that, he grabbed Jimmy by the collar, dragging him out like a sack of feed, and vanished into the night. Hank crawled out from under the bed, wide-eyed. That the fella from my dream? Sarah wiped her cheeks, nodding. That was Tom, my Tom come back one last time. The next morning, folks found Jimmy Hicks sprawled behind the ridge, babbling nonsense, his mind gone soft as mush. Nobody knew how he got there, but Sarah and Hank didn't care. They settled into married life, thick as thieves, tending to Old Man Chuck together till the end. A year after the wedding, Old Man Chuck's time ran out. He'd held on longer than anyone expected, but one evening with Hank and Sarah by his side, he took a ragged breath and spoke, first words in a decade. Me, Chuck Carver, a lonesome old cuss my whole life, never thought I'd end up with a house full of kin. Fate's a funny thing. Sarah, you've stuck by me through hell and high water, near as dear as a daughter in my eyes. I ain't got much to give, but I'll leave you something to start fresh. One last thing, don't box me up when I'm gone. Lay me out in the sun for 3 days. His voice cracked, and with that, he was gone, eyes shut peaceful-like. Hank and Sarah traded puzzled looks. Chuck talking was miracle enough. Now this? 3 days in the sun sounded plumb crazy, but they weren't about to argue with a dying man's wish. They laid him out on a bench in the yard, the spring sun warming his still frame, and waited. 3 days later, something wild happened. Where Chuck's body had been, there wasn't a corpse, just a big gnarled ginseng root, fat and gleaming like it had been pulled fresh from the earth. Hank scratched his head, muttering, "Well, I'll be damned." Sarah just stared, a slow smile tugging at her lips. They dug a hole right there, planted that root deep, and figured that was Chuck's way of sticking around. Time rolled on, decades, in fact. Hank and Sarah built a life together, raising a passel of kids who grew up and gave him grandkids of their own. The hollow changed, roads got paved, but those two stayed put, tending the land where Chuck's ginseng took root. Stranger still, they didn't age like folks ought to. At 90, Hank still swung his cleaver with a steady hand, and Sarah's eyes sparkled like she was 30. Tongues wagged, some swore it was that ginseng, working some backwoods magic. Truth was, it wasn't the root keeping them young, it was something deeper. Call it kindness, call it grit. Chuck had taken in Tom out of the goodness of his heart, raised him right. Tom paid it forward, caring for Chuck when he couldn't care for himself. Sarah picked up that thread, holding the family together through every storm. That's what kept them going, love and decency, plain and simple. Well folks, that wraps up our first tale. I'm Nancy Thompson, and I hope you've enjoyed the full moon and the thick fog. Stick around, next up, I've got another yarn to spin, straight from the heart of American folklore. It's called The Carpenter's Lodging, a man on a rocking chair, a leaf, and a moral reckoning. Picture this, a muddy road in a sleepy southern town, 2 fellas hauling tools under a setting sun, and a white cat sparking a mystery that'll keep you guessing. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. Now, let's set the stage. Our next story kicks off in Flat Rock, a little burg nestled at the foot of Pine Hollow Ridge. It's got history. Back in the day, it was a trading post for trappers, then a stop on the old stagecoach line. These days, it's quiet, but the past lingers in the clapboard houses and the tales folks tell. Two men are trudging down a rutted path from Tower Hill to Flat Rock: Bill Weston, a carpenter with a keen eye, and Frankie Rich, a scrappy little drifter with a chip on his shoulder. The sun's dipping low, and they're in a hurry to beat the dark. So here they are, Bill Weston and Frankie Rich, hustling down that muddy stretch from Tower Hill to Flat Rock, toolboxes banging against their thighs. The sky's turning a bruised orange, dusk creeping in fast. Bill's a solid guy, a carpenter who can fix anything with a hammer and a sharp eye. Frankie's a wiry little scrapper, the kind who'd beg or brawl to get by, barely 25 and already rough around the edges. They're beat from a long day, but Flat Rock's lights are winking in the distance, promising a bed and a hot meal. They're halfway there when Frankie, leading the way, trips hard, lands flat on his backside with a yelp. What the? He scrambles up, rubbing his tailbone, and there it is, a white cat, sleek as snow, sitting smack in the path, staring at them with cool green eyes. Frankie's temper flares. You blind little flea bag. Knocking me down like that, I oughta tan your hide. He snatches a stick from the roadside, ready to swing. Bill grabs his arm, firm but calm. Easy, Frankie. What's the point of wailing on a cat? Look at it, fur's too clean for a stray. Bet it belongs to somebody with money. You bust it up, and we'll be paying for it till Christmas. Frankie grumbles, but Bill's got a point. He tosses the stick aside, jabbing a finger at the cat. Lucky my buddy's got sense, you mangy thing. Next time, I'm breaking your legs. The cat doesn't blink, just flicks its tail and swipes a paw at Frankie's shin, quick as a whip. Then it darts off into the brush, leaving Frankie cussing up a storm. Bill shakes his head, smirking, and they trudge on. By the time they hit Flat Rock, night's fallen, blanketing the town in a soft hush. They'd cracked a job the day before, fixed a barn roof for a farmer up the ridge, and got paid $5 for it. Tonight, they're flush enough to splurge. Downtown Flat Rock's got a joint called the Pinnacle Inn, owned by Silas Halford, the richest man in 3 counties. Story goes, when Silas opened the place years back, it stirred up a heap of trouble, something big, though folks don't agree on what. Silas has a brother, Sam Halford, older by a few years. Their folks died young, so the Halford boys grew up tight, 2 peas in a pod, leaning on each other to scrape by. Funny how luck works, though. Take Frankie Rich, orphaned early, same as the Halfords, but where they climbed, he's still scrounging at 25, no roof to call his own. Bill clocks the sour look on Frankie's face as they near the inn, guessing what's eating him. Without a word, he strides up to the counter, asks the rate, $2 for a double room, and slaps the cash down. The clerk, a wiry fellow with a lazy grin, takes the money and leads them upstairs to a decent spread, 2 beds, polished wood dresser, a view of the street. Frankie whistles low. $2 well spent, he mutters, dropping his bag. He wanders to the window, pops it open, and squints out. Hey Bill, whose place is that? Big OL house, fancy as all get out. The clerk chuckles. That Silas Halford spread, owns this inn too.
Guy's got style, don't he?
Frankie nods, impressed, and goes to shut the window. Right then, a sharp meow cuts through the quiet. He leans out, spots that same white cat hopping onto Silas's wall, then vanishing into the yard. Bill Seymour, it's that damn cat again.
Bill ambles over, peers out. Sure enug, it's the white cat from the road, slinking through the shadows.
It turns, locks eyes with them, lets out another yowl, and bolts off.
Bill claps Frankie on the shoulder.
Good thing I stopped you earlier.
Tat Silas Halford's cat. Imagine the helvet catch if you'd rocket it up. Frankie scowls.
Yeah, well, if I had, I'd just deny it. Who's gonna prove it was me? He slams the window shut, and Bill lets it slide, no use arguing with a mule. They tidy up, head downstairs for grub, and call it a night, or so they think. After supper, night had settled over Flat Rock like a thick quilt. Bill and Frankie stepped out of the Pinnacle Inn, bellies full, and found the town buzzing. Lanterns swung from porches, casting a warm glow over Main Street, while firecrackers popped in the distance, sharp and bright against the dark. A racket of laughter and chatter filled the air, something big was going down. They flagged the inn clerk as he swept the stoop.
What's alles ruckus?
Bill asked. The clerk grinned, leaning on his broom. Didn't you know?
It's the Harvest Moon Festival tonight. Biggest shindig of the year.
Bill and Frankie swapped a look. Might as well join the fun. They wandered out, merging with the crowd spilling down the street. Flat Rock's main drag was alive, vendors hawking candied apples and roasted pecans, kids darting through with sparklers. Over by the creek, a fellow was juggling flaming torches, drawing whoops from the onlookers. Bill nudged Frankie. Let's check that out. But the throng was thick, shoulder to shoulder, no way through. Frankie jerked his chin toward a side alley. Come on, we'll cut around back, quieter that way. Bill nodded, and they veered off the main strip, slipping into the shadow of a narrow lane behind the inn. It ran right alongside Silas Halford's big house, its high fence looming in the dim. The festival noise faded to a hum back here, no foot traffic, just the two of them and the crickets. They were halfway down the alley when that white cat yowled again, sharp enough to raise the hairs on Bill's neck. They'd seen it duck into Silas's yard earlier, so they figured it was his all right, no surprise there. They kept walking, brushing it off, until the cat bolted out of nowhere, planting itself square in their path.
Frankie's fuse lit fast. You again, huh?
He reared back and kicked, aiming to send it flying. But the cat didn't dodge, just darted closer, rubbing against their legs, purring like a motor. Bill frowned, crouching down.
Hold up, Frankie, this ain't right.
He reached for it, meaning to scoop it up, but a whiff hit him, sharp, coppery, like a slaughterhouse floor. He pulled back, heart kicking up a notch, and grabbed Frankie's arm. Look at this. Under the faint moonlight, the cat's white fur was streaked red, blood fresh and sticky, matting its coat.
Frankie's eyes bugged out. I barely kicked it.
Ain't no way I did that. Bill squinted, running a hand along the cat's side. No cuts, no gashes. The blood wasn't its own. This ain't from you, he muttered. Looks like it came from somewhere else. Frankie swallowed hard, voice dropping.
You reckon so meetings up at Silas' place?
Bill's jaw tightened. Could be. This blood's still wet, happened recent. You stay put. I'm climbing over to take a look. He set the cat down, sized up the fence, and hoisted himself over with a grunt, dropping into Silas Halford's yard. The place was pitch black, save for a sliver of light leaking from a small room near the back corner. Bill crept toward it, keeping low, and sidled up under the window. He nudged the shutter open a crack and peeked inside. What he saw froze him cold. Sprawled on the floor was a man, still as stone, blood pooling under him, dark and glistening, like it had just stopped flowing. Bill's gut churned. The guy hadn't been dead long. He eased back, not daring to breathe loud, and slipped out of the yard as quick as he'd come. He grabbed Frankie's sleeve, voice low and urgent. We're going to the sheriff now. They hightailed it out of the alley, boots pounding the dirt, heading straight for the county office. Whatever was brewing at Silas Halford's, it wasn't their mess to untangle alone. By sunrise, Sheriff Amos Tate was on the move, 5 deputies in tow, marching up to Silas Halford's front gate. Bill and Frankie had spilled the whole story at the county office the night before. Cat, blood body, and the sheriff wasn't taking chances. The big oak door swung open, and out stepped a man with a salt and pepper beard, broad-shouldered and steady-eyed. Morning, Sheriff, he said, voice smooth as gravel.
I'm Sam Halford.
Mind telling me why you're hauling your boys to my doorstep at this hour? Sheriff Tate tipped his hat. No nonsense.
Got a report of a killing here, Sam.
We're here to check it out. Sam's brow furrowed, but he didn't flinch.
A killing?
Must be some mix-up, Sheriff.
A Frühlingsfein unter this roof. No bodies, no trouble.
You're welcome to look though, see for yourself. Tate nodded, waved his men inside, and they fanned out across the yard. Bill, trailing behind, piped up, Sheriff, I saw it clear as day. That body was in the back room near the corner. Tate grunted, leading the pack straight to the spot. They shoved the door open, boots scuffing the wood floor, and froze. Nothing. Just a bed with a patched quilt, a rickety chair, and a layer of dust. No blood, no body, not a damn thing out of place. The sheriff wheeled on Bill, eyes narrowing.
You pulling my leg, Weston? Where is this corpse you swore you SAW?
Bill's throat tightened, but he stood his ground.
Ihr Entlüing, Sheriff.
Last night, there was a man dead on that floor, blood everywhere. That white cat of theirs had it smeared all over its fur, too.
I recken te hitzebody over nicht.
Search the place, you'll find it. Before Tate could answer, Sam Halford pointed to a corner where that same white cat was curled up, licking its paws. That the one you mean?
Schieß mine. Never leaves a house.
Ain't been outside to get blood on her neither. Bill followed Sam's finger, and his stomach dropped. The cat's fur was spotless, pure white, not a speck of red. His mind raced. Someone must have cleaned it up, scrubbed the evidence away before dawn. He locked eyes with Frankie, who looked just as rattled, but kept his mouth shut. Tate wasn't buying it. All right, boys, spread out, top to bottom. If there's a stiff in here, we'll turn it up. The deputies tore through the house, 2 floors, every nook and cranny. Sam didn't bat an eye, just leaned against the wall, arms crossed, letting them poke around. After a while, he stretched and yawned.
Sheriff, you fellas take your time. You woke up early. I'm heading upstairs for a nap.
Holler if you need me. With that, he ambled up the creaky staircase, disappearing into the shadows. Half an hour later, the crew had combed the ground floor, nothing but cobwebs and old furniture. They were gearing up to hit the second floor when a man stepped out from the hall, blocking their path. Tate squared his shoulders. Who are you, and why you stopping us? The guy tipped his head, calm as a Sunday morning. Name's Silas Halford, head of this house.
What's lo doing rummaging through my place?
Bill sized him up. Silas looked a spitting image of Sam, same jaw, same build, just minus the beard. Tate filled him in, cat, blood body, the works. Silas listened, then shrugged.
Sheriff, you wanna search, go ahead.
Just keep it quiet, Sam's got a temper when he's roused. Don't poke the bear. Tate dipped his chin, and the deputies tromped upstairs, splitting off to check every room. They hit dead ends, empty closets, bare floors, until they reached the last door, Sam's room. He went in there this morning, Tate muttered. If we're checking, this is it. Hope he don't mind. Silas nodded. Long as you don't wake him, Sheriff. Tate eased the door open, and there was Sam, sprawled on a rocking chair, quilt pulled up to his chin, snoring soft. The deputies crept in, searched around. No blood, no clues. Looked like a bust. Then that white cat bolted in, leaping onto Sam's lap. Silas lunged forward, snatching it off and chucking it out the door with a scowl. Bill caught the move, Silas covering for a cranky brother, or something else. The sheriff didn't linger. They filed out, and Tate lit into Bill downstairs. Weston, you've wasted my damn morning with this hogwash. Lucky I don't lock you up for a false report. With a glare, he stormed off, deputies in tow. Silas lingered, smirking at Bill and Frankie. What's the matter, boys? Wanna take another spin through my house? He snorted and sauntered back inside, leaving them standing there, stumped. Bill Weston stood outside Silas Halford's place, hands jammed in his pockets, mind churning. He'd seen that body, blood pooling, fresh as a butcher's cut. No way he dreamed it. The cat, the room, the whole damn thing. Yet here they were, empty-handed, with Sheriff Tate spitting mad and Silas smirking like a fox. Frankie shuffled beside him, muttering, "This don't add up, Bill. Something's rotten." Bill nodded slow. "Yeah. Too clean, too quick. We ain't done here." They didn't head back to the Pinnacle Inn right off, opted to crash another night instead, chewing over the puzzle. Evening rolled in, and the sky turned mean. Thunder rumbled, low and ornery, then rain hit, sheets of it, hammering the roof and turning flat rock streets to mud. Bill sat by the window in their room, staring out at Silas's place, lost in thought. Frankie paced, antsy as a caged hound. A gust blasted through, slamming the window wide. Rain sprayed in, soaking the floorboards. Frankie lunged to shut it, cursing under his breath, when a lightning bolt cracked the sky, bright as day for a split second. He froze, squinting through the downpour. "Bill, look at that." Across the way, in Silas's upstairs window, Sam Halford rocked in that chair, same as before. That white cat was nestled against him, tail flicking lazy. Frankie's voice dropped to a whisper. "That ain't right. He's still sitting there, Been a whole day. Ain't nobody sleep that long on a rocker. Bill's eyes narrowed, gears turning. Unless he ain't sleeping. He bolted up, grabbed his coat. Come on, I've had enough of this. Frankie blinked. What, you going back in? Bill didn't answer, just barreled out into the storm, Frankie scrambling after him. They hit Silas's yard, rain pelting their backs. Bill scaled the fence again, slickwood slipping under his grip, and dropped down. A big sycamore stretched up near the house, its branches brushing Sam's window. Bill climbed, boots digging into wet bark, and hauled himself onto the sill. He shoved the window open, swung inside, and landed soft on the floorboards. Sam was still there, rocking chair creaking faint, quilt bunched around him. Bill stepped closer, reached out, and touched his shoulder. Ice cold. No breath, no pulse. Sam Halford was dead as a doornail. Well, I'll be, Bill muttered. Silas, you slick bastard, hit him right under Tate's nose. He turned to call Frankie, but a voice cut through the dark. Too late, Weston. You figured it, so you're done. A blade flashed, Silas, stepping out of the shadows, swinging hard. Bill dove, crashing into the floor as the knife bit air. He rolled to his feet, heart hammering. Silas loomed, rain dripping off his coat, licking the blade like a madman. How'd you know? He snarled. Bill grinned, tight and cold. You're good, Halford, damn near perfect. But you slipped. First, that cat, you said it was Sam's, never left the house. Yet when we got here, it was skittish, hiding in the corner, wouldn't go near him. Then upstairs, it jumped right on him, cozy as you please. Funny, huh? Second, you flipped when it did, thought you were just cranky about Sam's nap. Nope, you didn't want us poking too close. And third? That leaf. Silas cocked his head. Leaf. Bill nodded. Fell off you yesterday, matches the sycamore out there. You played Sam to greet us, all beard and bluster, then ducked upstairs while Tate's boys searched. Propped Sam in that chair, staged it nice, then climbed out the window down the tree, and strolled back in as yourself, like you'd been gone. Smart, 'cept the leaf gave you away. Silas barked a laugh, harsh and wild. So what if I killed him? He had it coming, screwed me over years back when we built this place. If it weren't for him, I'd be twice the man I am. Bill frowned, pressing. What did he do to deserve a knife? Silas's eyes blazed. Enough questions, time to shut you up. He lunged, blade slashing. Bill dodged, weaving tight, the room a blur of rain and shadow. Bill Weston squared off with Silas Halford in that rain-slicked room, the air thick with tension and the tang of wet wood. Silas swung again, knife carving a wild arc, but Bill ducked low, sidestepping fast. They circled each other, Bill light on his feet, Silas heavy with rage. You're a dead man, Weston. Silas roared, lunging hard. Bill twisted, grabbed a chair and flung it, caught Silas square in the chest, sending him staggering back. The fight spilled into a blur, Silas slashing, Bill dodging, furniture crashing. Bill landed a solid punch, rocking Silas's jaw, but the bastard kept coming, fueled by something feral. Then Silas shifted, his stance widened, steps quick and deliberate, like a boxer weaving through a ring. Bill's eyes narrowed. That move, you're no backwoods rich boy. That's a northern fighter's trick. You trained with Johnny Blade Carson, didn't you? Silas grinned, teeth flashing in the dim. Sharp eye, Weston. Yeah, I'm Jack Carson, Blade's top dog. Took his lessons and ran. Bill's mind raced, clicking pieces into place. So that's why you killed Sam. He figured you out, ruined whatever game you were playing up north, forced you back here to play the gentleman. Silas's laugh turned bitter. Ruined me? He torched my whole damn life, outed me to the wrong folks. I had to start over, claw my way up. He didn't deserve to share this. He charged again, knife high, but Bill was ready. He sidestepped, hooked Silas's arm, and twisted, sent the blade clattering to the floor. Silas snarled, kicking out with a low sweep, but Bill jumped it, landing a knee to his gut. Silas doubled over, gasping, and Bill grabbed a hammer from his belt. Nothing fancy, just a carpenter's tool. He muttered something under his breath, a quick prayer or curse, and swung. The hammer glowed faint, a trick of the light, maybe, then cracked down, catching Silas across the temple. Silas dropped like a sack of bricks, out cold. But then, Silas dropped like a sack of bricks, out cold. But then, something wild happened. A shadow peeled off him, dark and wispy, like smoke curling from a chimney. It took shape, a lean, snarling figure, eyes glinting mean. Bill blinked, hammer still raised. What in the hell? The shadow lunged, fast as a rattler, but Bill swung on instinct, catching it mid-air. His hand clamped around its throat, felt real enough, cold and squirming. The thing hissed, voice rasping like dry leaves. "Spare me, Weston. I'm done, won't cross you again." Bill's grip tightened, jaw set. "Murder's got a price, Jack. You don't walk from that." The shadow, Jack Carson's true self, or whatever he'd become, spat back, "You're smug now, but you'll end up like me, mark my words." It cackled, high and sharp, until Bill slammed the hammer down again. A flash sparked, bright, blinding, and with a howl the shadow burst apart, gone like dust in the wind. Bill stood there, chest heaving, staring at Silas's limp body. The man on the floor was just a shell now. Jack Carson's real venom had been in that shadow, and Bill had snuffed it out. He shook his head, muttering, "Poor bastard. Victim of your own mess, I reckon." He didn't stick around to sort it, left Silas where he lay, slipped out the window, and dropped back into the storm-soaked yard. The rain swallowed him up as he vanished into the night. That's the tale, folks, long and winding, called The Carpenter's Lodging. It's really about Bill Weston, a stand-up guy who once judged cases back east. Think of him like a frontier detective. Some shadowy outfit framed him, sent him tumbling through time or fate, landing him here in Flat Rock as a carpenter. He didn't quit though, kept digging, facing down every twist, until he nailed the real crook behind it all and punched his ticket home. I'm Nancy Thompson, and that's the yarn spun. Liked it? Drop a note below, subscribe, share, all that jazz. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time with another slice of American grit.